We're starting. This is Traci Harrell. I'm super excited to be here with DeLayla and DeLayla and Debrina. I'll have you ladies both give a quick introduction. We'll start with you, Debrina, and then we'll continue the conversation we were having.
Fabulous. Well, it is so wonderful to be here, and I'm all about transformation, empowerment, people living their fullest and best lives, being personally, spiritually, emotionally, and financially free, and teaching women how to live juicy lifestyles of peace and joy and ease and grace and flow ductivity. And the way I impact and reach others is through my nationally published books, my programs and courses and elite retreats, my one-on-one coaching, my signature courses and intensives, and also through my speaking and my world travel. I'm all about the juicy woman lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
DeLayla, over to you.
Darling, thank you. Thank you. I am Debrina Michelle Elliott.
Can you ladies hear me?
Yes, we can now.
I had just finished my introduction.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me now? I can't hear you yet. Can you say something?
Hello, testing.
All right, I can hear you now. Okay. So, thank you for that, Debrina. I heard everything you said.
Great.
And DeLayla, I saw your mouth moving, but I couldn't hear a thing. So we got editing capability, so it's all good. So yes, DeLayla, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, thank you. I am DeLayla Michelle Elliott, the proud wife of Leon Elliott, and we are basically. I have the honor to know my beautiful sister, Miss Debrina Jackson Gandy, and through our programs, even together, we've been doing some teaching, and many retreats, etc. That I've been doing with Debrina. But my purpose and passion is to reprogram the soul. I am a spiritual technologist. I have a 30-year banking background and financial services. And I am the Chief Marketing Officer for World Fidelity Life, which is a financial services practice. And then through the W3 Wealth Institute, I have programs and private coaching and group coaching in financial literacy and wealth consciousness. So with that, I have developed the soul development life cycle kind of pattern after the software development life cycle as it pertains to how to reprogram the soul, which I in turn as the mind, the will, and the emotion. So when I say soul, I'm talking about reprogramming the mind, investing and acknowledging the power of our will, and then also knowing how much emotion and feeling and intention plays in renewing the mind for success. So that is just a little bit about me, and I'm very excited about that. And glad to be here, Traci.
I am so excited to have you both here. I feel like this is the dynamic duo. I didn't get Batman and Robin. I got Superman and Wonder Woman and Superwoman and Wonder Woman. It's like, okay, this is spectacular. So we're going to consider this the first of many amazing connections. First thing I wanted to do is to ask you both a question regarding racial equity and inclusion. As you know, this is called the Bigger Than Me Success Series, Achieving Racial Equity and Inclusion in Business, Education, Wealth, and Health. And I've been in a number of sessions with both of you, and I know the power of the work that you both do. And so, DeLayla, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to circle back around to you, Debrina. But DeLayla, when you talk about reprogramming the soul, reprogramming the mind, the will, and the emotions. So for both of you, this is really a conversation around, the psychology and the physiology of change. So we're driving a transformative initiative. Our goal is to really disrupt the status quo. To change systems, it's about disrupting the status quo. So Debrina, you talk a lot about the mind and the heart. DeLayla, you mentioned the soul. So ladies, together, help us to really navigate this conversation first around what does it take to truly drive change, especially as it relates to racial equity and inclusion?
Thanks, Tracy. That's an awesome question. And for me, when I think about racial inclusion, when I think about racial equity, first of all, it starts with the individual. That's why it's so imperative that as we look at the nation as a whole, it's hard to turn a ship, an ocean liner in the harbor. But if you take one individual and help them understand who they are, where they come from, what power they possess, their skills, their values, what are their non-negotiables, then they can take a look at where they are in the spaces that they occupy, and then they can determine for themselves and create their own economy. They can determine for themselves and create their own development of where their career is going versus asking for permission and waiting for someone to do something for them. See, I'm about creating. I'm not about competing, and I'm not about asking for permission. I'm about creating the space, creating the wealth, creating the health, creating the consciousness. And so as I'm working with my clients, as I'm working with my agents, as I'm working with my entrepreneurs, that I coach and train, I'm helping them decide for themselves. Again, I'm a technologist, okay? What is your requirement? What are you requiring of yourself? Okay, that's the ask. What are you asking of yourself first? Before you ask of others, what are you asking of yourself? And then what is the design that you're coming up with as far as what does that look like? What is the how, and how will you know it? And then what is the development that's necessary? Development of consciousness, development of awareness, development of skill, again, development of values. And then how do you build upon that? Who are the players? Who are you going to need? What resources are you going to need? Is it capital? Is it geography? Is it location? Is it a system? Is it people? Is it technology? What is it going to take? And then how are you going to measure your results? That's testing, right? When you can test what you have determined that are your values, your design, your development, your ask, your requirement, those tests are coming. And I feel like that's where we are right now. We're in the midst of testing and being tested. Why do we believe what we believe? That our beliefs are being tested. Our values are being tested. Our resolve is being tested, right? And so that is it's imperative, before anything comes or go live, anything comes to production in the technology world, we go through tests. So that slow development life cycle, Tracy, is how I am in my own way helping to bring about change. I first start with the individual, then we move into the next layer, of family, and then the next layer, of corporate and job, et cetera, as we go out kind of from in and then out as far as the circle, of people and relationships are concerned. But it definitely first starts within.
Mm. I love that. So I heard you say several things, and Debrina, I know I saw you nodding and right, etc. You
I
talk a lot.
agree.
I agree with all the above. You talk a lot about beliefs as well. What are your thoughts about what does it take to truly, when you think about the psychology of change, what do we need to do to drive racial equity and inclusion? Like at high
Right.
level, what are the first things that we focus on?
Right. Well, we're talking about, as DeLayla said, the individual is the cornerstone, the building block of social change, collective change. But when we look at collectively, we got to look at the ideology first. And an ideology is based upon some pillar beliefs that shape and inform behavior, choices, perception. So we have to acknowledge the ideology upon which America has been based. Because beneath that ideology are some deeply anchored beliefs that if you don't expose them and illuminate them and challenge them, you will keep running into them. Okay.
Mhm.
So we now have a climate finally, where it seems that people are willing to uncover, expose, and challenge long held and deeply installed beliefs. So let me give you some examples. So for this change that we're talking about, the American culture has been based upon a me, I, my individualistic ideology. Along with that has been a taker culture, not a give and share, not a collective, but a taker culture. There's enough for only a few has been the belief. There's more demand than supply, hence the cornerstone of capitalism. So we have to realize that everything this country's been built on has been based on an ideology that cannot hold up and stay in place if in fact we are truly serious about equity.
Mhm.
So me, I, mine, scarcity, there's enough for only a few, to ours and we, an abundance mindset, there's enough for all and value in all, not just a few. Now that sounds very humanistic, very basic in terms of values and relationship, but guess what? That's not what this country's been built on. And that bleeds into how we do business and the feel and vibe in the workplace and how we value or devalue um, workers and employees. Um, so, you know, it's like a house of cards. And that whole house of cards is now tumbling because those structures supposedly served us well with all kinds of shrapnel and negative byproduct as a result of how America's been doing things. So you were a young nation. And so if we're up for examining all that, not saying it's bad and the bad must go for the good, but what have we been operating from? What have we been believing from? Because the beliefs become invisible and you just do supposedly what you do. So illuminating that, first of all, just illuminating it. And that's why I love the 1619 project that the New York Times Magazine award-winning project led by Black journalists and a Black female journalist spearheaded it. It pulled the curtain back to tell the truth about America's ideology and how it became such a capitalist powerhouse. So this is taken from the 1619 project. And for folks who really want to get educated and understand what you call the ugly truth of America,
I
um,
did ask for the ugly truth.
we first get to pull the curtain back and look at what is so, and then ask, are we ready to depart from that and admit and acknowledge the blood that's on our hands,
Mm.
um, and how we've gotten to where we are as a huge capital power in the world. So that's just some of the beginning places, is just to realize what we're up against as far as the belief pillars that have undergirded this great country,
Mhm.
and look at the lopsided benefit to a few relatively and the expense of others for the benefit to a few. And are we willing to dismantle that? And that doesn't mean everyone can't win or more can't win.
Yeah.
I love that. What a couple of things I heard that I think are really, really foundational is this concept of acknowledging, our truth. like deciding that we want to acknowledge where we are and then move forward. I mean, I think without acknowledging some aspects of the truth, without acknowledging that there are problems today, without acknowledging the past, it's hard to really focus on that we do have problems today, then to focus on that we want to solve them. Oftentimes, you know, even with my brain, it's like duh, it's a given. But until you have individuals who are of power, in power, those in influence who want to say yes, we acknowledge that there things that have happened in our past that currently shape where we are today and some of the inequities that exist today. And we are ready to move forward. And I think it's as simple as just the acknowledgement of those things. Would you guys both agree that it is about acknowledging them and then moving forward? Is that and moving forward is the journey, but
Mm-hmm.
is acknowledging the extent of what we're talking about?
I think that's a starting point, and that's also a starting point with healing as well. True change, you have to do some acknowledgement that shows that you're aware of your current position
Right.
and what is so about it. And so we haven't been willing to do that in this country. We are the master illusionist, the um, controller of image of this perfect country, and everyone tries to get to America, but we have the highest incarceration rate per capita of any country. We have the highest death by gun violence of any other country. We have the highest divorce rate of any other country. We have more human trafficking per capita than any other country. We have more pharmaceutical prescriptions and abuse than any other country. We have more children in the foster system per capita than any other country. So every statistic that indicates civility and humanity, we have managed somehow to keep that behind this curtain of bubble gum and cotton candy. And when you pull the curtain back, it's a very different story. So we have to be willing to just acknowledge what is so, and you got to be mature and really ready for change to do that. That's step one. That's not the entirety. That would be my
Hmm.
take.
Right.
I love it. Delana, what are your thoughts about I call it acknowledging the ugly truth. And during our last session, I ended it by saying, you know, it's I think about it's achieving racial equity and inclusion. I think about it similar. For me, it's like it's easy for me. I've done a lot of work in this space. I lived this experience. Done a lot of work around adaptive leadership. Uh, Explorations on how to improve things. So for me, it's simple and easy. Like it's clear what things can happen to drive change, but it's like weight loss. It's simple for the concept is simple, but executing it is not easy, right?
And,
For some,
right.
for some, easier for some than others. So I feel like we're asking corporate America to do something that is just 100% against the status quo. Basically we're saying, hey, it's simple, it's not going to be easy because systems are designed to maintain the status quo. So one of the conversations we're going to have in the session on 9-9 is really about disruptive change. So if we're saying disruptive change requires us to like Debrina said, acknowledge where we were, put that in the past, and agree that we need to move forward. What are your thoughts, Delaney, about, and she used a really special word, I heard healing and beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
eh,
Mm-hmm.
changing our beliefs. And really, when you talk about reprogramming the soul, both of you talked about emotions and beliefs and those elements. So how do we, let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, exposing the ugly truth, the
Mm-hmm.
importance of that, and then healing from it. Like you putting, like for me, I'm literally putting your ugly business on the streets, as they would say.
Well,
What encouragement would you give to a company to say it's okay? Like we're asking you to do this in a safe space. You're not going to be penalized for it. It's about acknowledging where we are so that we can move forward.
right. And when you're talking about corporate America, Tracy, because yet I grew up in corporate America. I'm yet still in corporate America, helping some of the senior leaderships in corporate America. When you talk about corporate America, you're talking about an entity. So when you talk about healing and beliefs, it gets down to what is the culture of that company. right? So when you look at the culture of the company, then what is driving that? Because we, I won't name names, but we have been in front of the Senate for years now on disruptive behaviors as a company, where you're talking Fortune 500 company, misuse and abuse its power and authority over its customer base by opening up accounts that nobody asked for, because there was a culture in awarding how many accounts that they could open up for a customer. They were incentivized, right, to do that. So the culture was by any means necessary.
Mm.
Get your reward if you want to be incentivized. If you want to have your bonus this year, then we need for you to open up so many accounts. So that culture, um, this kind of it manifested as disruptive illegal practices that has us before the Senate. And as a company, we were regulated to how much profit we could do, and it caused two CEOs to resign, and now we have a whole change of leadership, three CEOs within 3 years.
Mm.
Okay, so when you're talking about changing the narrative, changing the behavior of a corporation or corporate America, as we say, you have to really understand what the base culture of that company is and face, like you said, that ugly truth. So how did they handle that ugly truth? They changed leadership and brought in a whole new narrative. They brought in a whole new set of culture, which now they've got a new paradigm that they're trying to bring in, right? And so with change of leadership, with a new paradigm, with new values, and a whole new system of how we're going to think and how we're going to move forward now, you've got almost 300,000 employees. So
Mm.
how do we change that? And so
Right.
that is how many people, millions of people were impacted, right? Because they were charged fees and all that kind of stuff. So now you're talking about a segment, just a segment, when you talk about racial quality, equity, bias, that's just a segment. So if it's going to take a whole legislative, regulatory, we're going to cap how much money you can make for a company to decide to change its culture. What is it going to take for that same company now to decide that it's going to change its culture about how many African Americans are in leadership? How many women are they going to promote? How many millions of dollars are they going to put into the Black community to help businesses grow? You understand what I'm saying? So
Mm-hmm.
it takes the leadership of that company to make a decision that this is what we're going to do. And then it kind of comes down, from senior leadership to mid management, to the lead, to the individual worker.
Right. And what I love, I agree. I agree 100%. One of the things I think it starts at the leadership, for sure. With that one of our we talk about the four key challenges that have persisted for the decades in corporate America: unconscious bias, similarity bias, unequal performance standards, and a lack of CEO accountability. So of course we all agree that it starts with the CEO, but at the end of the day, would you both also agree that culture is really created moment by moment, right? It's the individuals and how they choose to react. So when we're trying to change culture, I love how both of you talked about the individuals. It's about the individual beliefs. I think you were the first one, Debrina, that I spoke to, and when you said it's about the beliefs, and we address the beliefs, and that then you know
Yeah,
changes allows us to change our actions.
right.
So let's talk a little bit about that word beliefs. Why is it important for us to really uh, do some deep dives on what we believe?
Well, I want to go back to something DeLayla said, and I want to tell a story first to
Hmm.
illustrate how change can happen in an organization in a short amount of time. And she talked about it beginning with the leadership. So I'm going to use the example of a college here in the greater Seattle area. I had the pleasure of being appointed by the Senate and approved by the governor to serve as a trustee for 9 years at this college. And the way we did our rotation on the board is that every 4 years, you were the board chair. And the board chair has a little bit more power and influence than the other members of the board. Well, as it turned out, our college had years and years of stability. We were the darling in the college system here in Washington State. And then the president, much beloved and highly esteemed president, had a medical crisis, unexpectedly out of left field. And all of a sudden, here we were without this esteemed, clear thinking, visionary leader that was beloved by everybody on campus, students, faculty, and staff. Now, the composition of the campus, and one of the things that we bragged about and had won awards for, was the high percentage of diversity in terms of ethnic diversity in our campus. And we claimed to be had the highest percentage of diversity on our campus of all the colleges in the state. That was our claim. Yet, the CEO and president of the college for the 51 years of the college had been white men. Now, that's a disparity. That's a disconnect. So here I come, rotating into the chair position the year that the president has the medical challenge. So after all these years of stability, smooth sailing, here come tidal waves, and I am the one at the helm of the cruise ship. And I freaked out initially. I'm like, all these years of stability, and then when we have this year of upheaval, I'm the one at the helm of the ship. So I called a mentor of mine that had been chair of a college board already in her experience, and she said, "You're the perfect person to be at the helm as the upheaval happens." I'm like, okay, that's a reframe. Well, when it came time to hire a president, given the diversity on campuses statewide, and we looked at how many CEOs looked like the majority of students on their campuses, it was paltry. That was part of the conversation. And the lie was, oh, where do we find people of color, right? That lie that gets perpetuated to justify. Where do we find qualified? That's another code word. Qualified people of color that can run colleges. So here's how the shift happened, where we, under my leadership, hired our first president of color, who was an African-American man in the history of this institution. 50 years, not just 5 years, not just 50 years, all white dudes over 65. And then we hire an African-American man who's under 50. How does that actually happen? So first of all, I took a look at the requirements, because requirements can end up being barriers to participation. When I looked at the requirements for president, they were saying doctorate required. And I started to talk to leaders in education, and I said, so tell me what the barriers are. Why don't we see more people of color applying? They said, well, oftentimes, Debrina, it says doctorate required. And you may find in communities of color, for various reasons, you ran out of money, you had to help family out, whatever, that you have everything but the doctorate. You did the study, you did your dissertation, but you don't have the I said, so say no more. We are not going to have that requirement when we go to select our president. It will be preferred, but not required. Changing that one word changed the response. The pool Then I said, so if we're serious about this, we want to really have some excellent outreach. So we're going to hire a consulting company. Well, who do we hire? And I'm not on the search firm for the president. I didn't put myself on the search firm. I put myself on the committee to find the consultant who's going to do the outreach and help us bring candidates to the campus. Well, who do we end up choosing as a consultancy? A Black man-led consultancy. So then I say to him, sister to brother, yes, sister to brother, I want you to pick up the phone and make some outbound calls. Don't wait for resumes to come in. That's not how people of color operate. We're relational. We need outreach. We want to know that this college is serious about hiring people of color. And so I said, I have names I'm going to be giving you, and I expect you to follow up, and I want to report back on what was the outcome of the conversation. This is all going on behind the scenes. I'm the chair. So nobody can say, Debrina, what do you, I'm the chair. And so we had a record number of responses. We had all of our semifinalists were people of color. And we hired our first ever president of color, and that gets to be my legacy.
Wow.
But let me tell you, I was truly committed to it. It wasn't just an initiative, because we had the diversity initiatives on our little plaques and behind plexiglass all over the campus and all kinds of awards. But I, as a policy leader, as a governance leader, could say, we are removing this particular requirement like that. And we're going to hire someone to advocate and help us reach out that has the connections, the database, experience in the system, if we're serious about it and we're willing to break the usual norm, which is you wait till they respond. Oftentimes, if it's in the Journal of Higher Education, you might not subscribe to that. So now you missed the announcement. If you're not in the know with the other doctoral candidates that are all vying for CEO positions, you don't hear that our college has an opening. You can be marginalized in different ways. So no, we're not just relying on ads in higher ed chronicles, which is the usual thing. Well, I asked the human resources, how do we get the word out? All these publications and official, I said, that's not going to work. We got to pick up the phone and call some people. And so I'm just giving examples of real things, real decisions, and a shift. And it didn't have to be radical and disruptive, because a lot of times we think if it's going to be change, it has to be radical. Like, careful about always associating change with disrupting systems. Careful, because that takes a lot to upheave an entire, we didn't have to upheave anything. We changed a word from required to preferred for doctorate. And we hired someone who had the resources and the reach and experience to get the pool we said we wanted. And then I gave instructions to my trustees that were putting together the search committee, how it needed to look. So it's reflective of our community and our students. It just took one person with a consciousness to make some change. It didn't disrupt anything per se. So let's not overthink it. Sometimes it's not that darn big a deal, right? And then one other thing I'll quickly share is then I initiated an African-American empowerment movement a few years ago here in Seattle. And after we had established our excellent reputation, we then initiated a direct impact dollars initiative specifically to empower African-American businesses in growth and capacity building. And instead of going to organizations and asking, begging for money and putting together 5-inch grants, we went directly to our community, which has tons of dollars moving through it on a daily basis, millions and millions. And I said, why don't we make requests from the community to create a pool of money that we then decide what African-American businesses get it. And let's have it replenishable, so it's not one and done, a pot's empty. They repay, and we're going to call it a reward because it's not a loan and it's not a grant, a repayable award. And we're not going to have a credit check, and we're not going to require collateral, as the bank would do, as the Small Business Association would do. And people say, well, they're not going to pay it back if there's if it's not a loan. They're not going to pay it back if there's no collateral. I said, I disagree. The whole community is in support. We had a big reception to acknowledge the awardees. So they knew a lot was on the line. They were being watched, and we wanted them to win because their repayment was the basis for the next pool that would then go back out to a new group of Black business owners. So they knew if they defaulted or their business didn't grow or translate the dollars, that it was affecting the next round of Black businesses. And guess what? That was enough for them to be held accountable and operate in integrity. That is in the face of, you must have a credit check, you must have collateral, or they won't repay. So we just introduced a new possibility operating on a different foundation of trust versus doubt, and it worked. So, but I founded the vision. I was the leader of the planning team. Here's how we're going to do this. So it doesn't have to take all that, really. And it can be one new decision or something that's been done saying, not this time, and you flip the dial a different way. So, you know, and you know, like DeLayla was talking about an organization with 300,000 people. Okay, well, that's a cruise ship, not a speedboat you're turning. But let us not, in every case, think it's so monstrous and huge of an issue. Sometimes it's leaders and policymakers behind those closed doors at those big oak tables and the high back chairs saying, we're going to do it differently now, and here's how. And if we're serious about having more people of color participate, then the barriers we've put in place, we are willing to knock them down. And the barriers are called requirements.
Yes.
So I just want to share those two stories: real talk, real examples, real removal of barriers, and real success.
Wow.
That's powerful.
Wow, that was powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was powerful. And it's interesting because what I love about it, a couple of things I actually wrote down. I was kind of just taking it in, but I heard you say, we talked about deciding to do things differently.
Yep.
And you said, introducing a new possibility, operating on a system of trust. Now, that in itself is huge because I think oftentimes what you have, since you both talk about beliefs and healing, etc., because people have been traumatized or affected by current systems, there is no trust or there's a lack of trust. So then that healing needs to happen, right? So can we talk a little bit about the beliefs, the healing, and how do we get back to a place of trust where you are able to build a new foundation of possibilities on top of a revised foundation of trust? Delayed, I'm gonna ask you to kind of build on that, and then I'll come back around to you, Debrina. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, we, in our teaching, we say healing definitely is a choice.
Mm,
That's why I like to concentrate on the individual. When you are a healed individual, when you choose that no matter what has happened, especially my career, because of the nature of being in finance and mortgage banking and life insurance annuities, just in that financial space. Not only was I 9 times out of 10, okay, the only Black in the department or the only Black, there's been places where I've been the only Black in the bank. So just that level of knowing that I am that person, that Black woman. There's a level of pressure there, but then also there has to be, and what I adopted in my career was self-love and understanding the power that I brought to that space, the skill that I brought to that space, the confidence that I brought to that space. And so when you talk about healing, it is a matter of choosing to think differently as an individual, to see myself or see ourselves as who we really are. I like to say by divine right, and not waiting again for a necessary a door to be opened or a some opportunity to open itself, but to create that opportunity by being that increase, what I call the increasing person. In other words, you outgrow the space that you're in by being more than what you are required to be. Okay, in other words, this is the job description, but I bring more than that job description. I bring more than that required list. Like Debrina talked about, they removed that one word and it opened up the pool. You know, so in my career, like I talked to Tracy and I talked earlier, I never qualified based on the job description for any job that I have had in my life. Okay. If I paid attention to the job description before I applied, I would never have applied because I just didn't meet it. But the desire to work in that field, the desire to work in that space, I brought other skills. I brought soft skills. Skills that I had refined within myself because I do people, and knowing the relationships and working with people, I was able to overcome my, the mental space of saying, "Oh, girl, you don't qualify. You don't even apply, etc." I was able to get through that door because of the other skills that I brought to the table. And I believe that, especially, as Black people, we bring other skills to the table, and that is a part of our healing. We bring skills. One thing that Miles Monroe said before he passed, he said, whenever the world is in crisis, they go to a Black man. Because we bring skills to the table. Whenever the world of America's in crisis, there's a Black person at the helm. Debrina needed to be the helm to make that change happen. And that's what we bring to the table. That's that awareness. And so when we bring that awareness to the table, it itself opens that door, creates that space of possibility. And that's where the healing begins. That's why I said we gotta start with understanding who we are as the individual. What gave Debrina the confidence to sit at the helm and say, I'm gonna do it different? That's an innate awareness that she had within herself, because had she not, she would have never had the confidence to say, I'm going to change this. No, we're going to take that word out. That's what I love. It's that innate awareness of self to be able to say, I have the responsibility, I have the power and authority, and this is what I'm going to do. It took a power within for her to even make that bold step.
So,
And that's
so
what we bring to the table.
and I love this. There's a couple of dynamics that I hear, and we're going to go down this path just for a moment. So what advice would you two share? So basically, there's advice around healing that you could give to someone who is in a position of power, where there's a responsibility for them to leverage that power to actually drive change. That's
Mm,
one. There's a
this is good.
there's a level of accountability and a level of healing that comes to someone who's not in power per se, who's maybe been victimized, who've done everything that they could, who's delivered twice as much and still didn't get credit, and are traumatized by one of the four challenges that we talk about: unequal performance standards, unconscious bias, similarity bias, and a lack of CEO accountability. We know thousands of examples of people telling stories that would say there's a different level of healing that needs to happen there. And then if you think about it, there's those people who are in power, right? There's a level of healing that needs to happen there as well. So I'm going to start with the first one, and then we're going to work through those three based on the time that we have, because I think it's important. So you think about healing, beliefs, and truth. You're the person in power. I've had people in power tell me, Tracy, I'm good. I opt out. Meaning,
Mm.
I've been at this company for X amount of years. I'm not trying to sacrifice or jeopardize my role, trying to help I'm out. I love what you're doing. Good luck with that. I opt out. So, what advice would you give to people who opt out, who don't have any accountability for the greater good, who don't want to change the status quo, who don't want to um, change anything, to don't want to see things being different? Like, I mean, what advice would you share with those individuals,
But
or what
technically,
advice would you share in general?
well, for me, for that person who, you have to be willing. And if there's no willingness, there's truly no advice for that person.
Gotcha.
because there's no willingness there.
Right.
Because a man convinces against his will is of the same opinion still, right? So that's
Did
why I
you
say that the
say
replays
that one more
are
time? A man, a
a
man
man convinced
convinced.
against his will is of the same opinion still. So if
See.
there's no willingness, you got to have the skill and the willingness
Mm,
to happen. You can't just want change and have the skill, but I'll say it like this: you can't just have the skill to change and not have the will. And so the person that's in power has the skill, has the power, has the authority. But if there's no willingness there, then they're of that same opinion. They're going to hold on to their bias. Then that's the person you go around. That's
mm,
the person you go over. That's the person
mm.
you just go through if you have to, because they're in your way.
Okay, that's awesome. Debrina, what are your thoughts? Again, same
So
question.
a few things. One is, even with that individual, I could understand if I was, let's say a white male who's benefited greatly from the I, me, my, individualistic, hierarchical. There's not enough for everybody. There's enough for only the few, and I'm in the few. And now you're talking about changing that dynamic. What, outside of maybe my altruistic, philanthropic
Mm.
side of myself, would have me excited about that? Because in my mind, the way my mind thinks, that means I lose. So the belief system is I lose. So as we are trying to dismantle, there are certain folks that are clawing tooth and nail to keep it in place because of the belief they have that is causing them to freak out at the notion of now moving to a we shared collective model. The Republicans would say, oh, you're talking about socialism. No, we're not. That's the only place they have to go to consider this inside the capitalistic, individualistic, materialistic mind. So we have to understand we're running up against that person's core beliefs. And if you were about healing, which is a chance to speak truth and also look at the emotions associated with our beliefs and experiences, then you would say, Bob, say more. And ask that question several levels deep until he say, listen, that sounds like loss to me.
Mm.
And when you think about people of color, opportunity and equity, what do you think about? I think about limited opportunity, and now people that look like me will have less. Thank you, Bob, for telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And what emotion
Mm,
comes with that? Fear, concern, worry, annihilation, obsolescence, whatever. Okay. Now, instead of that being in the room and not being addressed, there's an opportunity to tell the truth and not have judgment, and then talk about the emotions you have associated with that very much are in your body, very much are behind your eyeballs, very much affect and inform your perception, your disposition, your choices. There hasn't been space to just tell the truth like that. Not for, let's use African Americans and our Caucasian counterparts, because we have a unique history in this country separate from all other people of color. We have a unique relationship to this country and to Caucasian people that nobody else can even touch because it's distinct.
Right.
And that doesn't make any other experience not legitimate. This is a very specific, unique, distinct one. So that's, if you're talking about beliefs, truth telling has to go hand in hand, and there has to be the space to say what they are, because they may not be popular, may not be politically correct, clutch the pearls. And this is a culture of image and pretense. So when you talk about truth telling, those two are not compatible in this culture, in the current paradigm. So that's one thing I want to mention. Then I also want to go back. You asked a question about trust. How do we build trust? So there's trust between communities and trust within a community. So those are two separate conversations. So the Elevate Direct Impact Dollars Initiative, for example, was African Americans participating financially to support African American businesses. So there was trust that was involved even internally in our community because there was monies involved, thousands upon thousands of dollars of money. So we had to be very transparent about our fiscal agent and the planning team and the selection process to be sure there's no funny business. There's been plenty of contracts where there was funny business and there was nepotism, and we wonder why people who might have brown or black skin didn't get it once again and don't know that it's made to look like a fair process. It's already rigged. They're going through the motions to be sure they, let the proposal be available, the RFP be available for 3 weeks. So we were very transparent on our selection process. We had a committee made up of those who gave dollars to the initiative. It wasn't just the planning team making the decision. So those were all to build trust within the community. We did quarterly reports. Here's what's happening. We sent the newspaper articles out to the community that gave. When we were on King 5 News, we sent them the link. Hey, we're on TV talking about the initiative. So that was to build trust within, because historically, because of the trust that's been inserted, the distrust that's been inserted into our thinking about doing business with other brown and black people, those extra steps were to create trust. Mm-hmm. Then with the business owners, plus support was required. We actually thought, and we were wrong, that if we gave them a few training sessions on operations and finance and marketing and social media marketing to just kind of equip them to make the wisest use of these dollars they were getting, that would be enough. Well, what we found out after getting up close and personal and going through the selection process is that they were used to getting grants that went towards operational costs. They weren't used to dollars that had to be leveraged for growth and capacity building. So we had to insert some additional unplanned sessions with our awardees because they had to submit a budget before the dollars were released to them. And they all of them except one business owner had to shift their thinking and shift their budget. And we spent that extra time in Zoom sessions with them, helping them shift their thinking from cover expenses to now leverage these dollars for revenue growth, expansion, capacity building. And so that plus support was needed. So yes, the trust was there, but that was the form of support that met them where their need was. So we also have to be willing to meet people where their need is. Yeah, we put this great lineup together, but guess what? There was still another need. So if they were going to be successful, we needed to meet them where their need was. Plan a few more sessions to talk about this versus this and how to leverage. So I just wanted to point that out. And then trust between communities, particularly those who have been the ones making the decisions that affect other communities. There has to be a demonstration, like DeLayla said, of true willingness. And that's a big deal. Because unwillingness creates a force field to keep things as they are. So there has to be demonstrated willingness to change.
What does that look like? What does that look like to you when
So
it
for
comes to,
example,
because I mean, if you think about it, I'm gonna give you a quick example. You got Satya Nadella, for example. I think he's an
you have
amazing
what?
CEO. You have Satya Nadella. He's the CEO of Microsoft, and he's done uh, some declarations around their support of equity and inclusion, how they're going to provide money here, and they're going to, increase the number of black professionals in the organization and leaders in the organization. But again, to me, not addressing the problem, knees still on people's neck, right? The some people will still come in and cycle out with the same level of lack of retention. That they still haven't addressed the real problem. So what advice would you give to get people to really think about? I mean, he's willing to do something, right? He's making some declarations. Millions of dollars will be going to black banks and black, people. But still, the real problem, the problem that will prevent or that will allow individuals to come in and actually have equity and inclusion in the workplace aren't being addressed. So what advice would you say, would you share, what words would you speak to someone like that who has a willingness to want to drive change, but perhaps not awoke to, what that looks like and what areas they can focus?
It's very simple.
Mm-hmm.
You have listening forums.
That's what I was gonna say.
You
Communication.
bring together
Yep.
those who reflect those who you say you want to hire more of.
Mm-hmm.
It could be your existing African American and Brown employees, and you have a listening forum where you ask questions and that's it. And you don't edit, you don't try to talk them out of. You say, listen, if we really are serious about doing this, what are the things that we need to make have happen? Okay, and they're going to tell you it isn't just about hiring more African Americans or brown people, because as you said, Tracy, they'll cycle out shortly because the culture is killing their spirit.
Yes.
And they're not interested in going for drinks after work with people who are having these asinine conversations that they can't relate to, nor are they interested in. And then they're considered being antisocial because they don't want to hang out with Becky and Ricky and Tyler after work. So then you need some mentorship. You need a Black employees network as an organization within. So it isn't just, oh, let's get more numbers, hang on. And if you have a listening forum, you will hear from your Black and Brown employees what it will take to hire and retain and have them thrive. And it's not the same as our Caucasian counterparts. They're different creatures in many respects. They think differently, they process differently, they have a different value on relationships. And so what works for us as a corporate culture where we thrive is very different than what the status quo has been. And that's not even working necessarily for the majority culture either.
I love that.
So, yeah.
I love that. So we've also found is that oftentimes when you're in the corporation, I think I heard Delana say, you oftentimes will have, you know, truth telling that doesn't fully disclose the problems, because once you're on the inside, there oftentimes is a little bit of maybe barriers to wanting to keep that check rolling in on the 15th and the 30th. So oftentimes what we're doing is there's some work that can happen from the inside that needs to happen from the inside. I 100% agree. And I think having Black people show up and speak, their truth. But oftentimes the ones that have been cycled out are the ones that can also, that are on the outside looking in, can also provide some really
Yeah.
valuable insight regarding
Yes.
what success looks like. I have like literally thousands now of interviews of people who have been through these cycles and are basically all saying the same thing. Like, here's, and also I know people who are presidents of other chapters around the country who are saying, Tracy, I love what you're doing. I wouldn't dare speak up and tell the truth. They're already looking at me crazy. So I think a lot of times CEOs don't really, executives don't really understand the pressure that Black people are under when they're in corporate America already, with lack of trust in some areas, some, fears and misbeliefs and disbeliefs, or just beliefs in general that would not allow them to speak the truth. And so being able to speak the truth, speaking truth to power, I think looks different depending on whether you're inside or outside, depending.
Right.
Yeah, and there has to be a safe place. So she's gone. This
Whoops.
is we're the host now.
You the host,
I'm
Delayna.
the host, girl.
Oh,
Oh
oh
my
my God. But it's still recording. So I would
Yeah.
say the space to speak truth and there not be negative repercussions.
Repercussions, exactly.
Subtly,
Mhm.
passively,
Right.
microaggressively,
Exactly.
below
Exactly.
the radar, right? And so a lot of CEOs don't know that there is a culture of repercussion
Exactly.
way below the level they're at. So
Exactly.
even though you're like, tell us, you got to let us know when these things go on. Well, guess what? Next thing I know, in my HR folder, there's a
Thank
false
you.
bad evaluation that somehow got in there.
Exactly.
Real
And
story, real talk,
there
real,
has to be
right?
trust. Yeah, there has to be trust built, but and like you said, and the trust building is so that there is something in place and in writing, right? That will identify if there is repercussion,
Mm.
so that there is a consequence to the people who are causing the repercussion, right? So
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they know that it can't just be we don't have repercussion, but if there is, what is the repercussion, right?
that's right.
Because that way that middle manager or that lead, like you said, that's three steps down from the CEO or the senior VP of that department would know that, oh wow, okay, I can't do this because now my job is in jeopardy because we are have created what we call a safe space. And
Mm,
that's where it really has to be developed, is that safe space in writing, in policy, and
mhm,
in execution. And when
mhm.
it happens, then again, everybody knows, what's in writing and they can follow that policy.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes.
So I think we have some,
Well,
we
I
have some,
know that, go ahead.
I was gonna say, we have some good things, that we can definitely bring to the table and have those conversations. Like you said, with the people that look like us, that are experiencing, um, even for those of us that it has been good for, right? We have to understand where everyone is in that pot
Mhm.
and then develop the policies and procedures and practices, that will benefit the whole. And you can't do that without having the truth conversation and then put it
Yes,
in writing and part of the culture and practices.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. We kept going. We kept
I'm
going,
I'm
Cheryl.
so glad you did, and I see the recording kept going too. So praise
Exactly.
God for that. Love it. So what the last thing I heard you say was about trust. So we're gonna cycle to healing. Say you're one of those individuals who has felt abused, has felt one of those corporate challenges, has been, you know, had an experience that was less than optimal in corporate America. And we want to give them hope as well, right? We have now a time where people are actually listening to the stories. I've
Yeah.
had hundreds and hundreds of people come on, share their story, do surveys, talk about their experience. What would you share with both those individuals as well as who've had the knee on their neck in corporate America, who've experienced corporate chokeholds? What advice would you tell them about healing, beginning to trust and believing that change can come, as well as then there's going to be that's the black person, for example, and then what about the other individual who unknowingly, unwittingly may have been a party to putting the knee on the neck? That's part of the work that we're going to be asking you guys to do, and I know we only have a few minutes left, so I'm not asking you to go deep in it, but why is that so important? Why is healing so important? We'll at least be able to cover that topic.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
There's
Dee.
no,
I'll
there's
let
no,
you
there's no
start.
progress without healing. There's
And
no
say
pro-
that part again.
there's no progress without healing, because if we're unhealed, then we're operating from a space of being broken. So if you're broken and trying to work, if you're broken and trying to succeed, it's you're coming from an unhealthy place. So what we can do, like Debrina and I were talking earlier, we can make sure that we have, the policies, the practices, the culture in place, so that as I determine that I am now going to heal, I choose to heal, I choose to go through a time of, renewing my mind. What does success look like for me? What is it that I want? Because when you're looking at healing, you can look at your wound, you're broken, and you understand that, that my I have a broken arm. So what does a healed arm look like? What does a healed arm function like? What is the expectation of a healed place? So we have to have that understanding of what does healed even mean to me? Does it mean now that I feel like I'm going to get paid for what I'm worth? What does it look like? You have to have a an answer, if you will, for yourself of what does healed look like, and then start moving mentally towards that space. Does that
So
make sense?
it does, and I think, Debrina, uh, you and I have talked in the past about acknowledging where you are. Right, because she's saying, what does it look like? That means you have had to have done some work around what do you feel about the experiences that you've had. So really being able to talk about the beliefs. Let's talk about that a little bit. Like why is it important for people to really I talk about that's part of the ugly truth as well. Like the experiences, the feelings. Let's go there. So I think you said you define soul, as the heart, the mind, the
Mind,
will,
will,
and
and
the
emotion.
emotions.
Yeah.
So let's talk about we don't typically talk about emotions, black people, right? We don't typically go there. So why is it important for us to uncover, to reveal, to heal through sharing our emotions?
Yeah. Well, it's not just sharing our emotions, it's releasing them. And there's a difference because we've done a ton of sharing our emotions and sharing our feelings, especially women. And that can actually, if you're not careful, create quicksand and you can't get unstuck. So it isn't
Mm.
just sharing our emotions, it's actual processes to release um, uh, compacted, suppressed, unaddressed, hanging out in our body emotions that make us defensive, that make us sick, that make us not as creative and genius and brilliant and effective, that make our relationships more challenging. And it isn't just African Americans as an example, but America has a whole bunch of compacted, compressed emotions around enslavement of its citizens called African Americans and the impact that has had over multiple generations on owning other humans as property and it being chattel enslavement, which is the worst, most inhumane form of slavery known to man on planet Earth. And so there's a lot of emotion that is being compacted generationally for not only African Americans, but also European Americans who are descendants of those who owned others. So it isn't just healing's needed in our community, healing is needed.
Yes.
And if you don't release those, let's call them toxic emotions, they will poison you internally and poison your relationships, poison your communities, your cities, and then you'll have a country that has the highest gun violence rate, the highest
Mm.
divorce rate, the highest incarceration. So we're already poisoned. Clearly, the suppress it, act like it's not there, fake it, fake it, fake it isn't working. And then beliefs too can be healed. But again, first of all, let's shed some light and acknowledge the beliefs that are there. So you know what it is you are addressing and challenging, and then you are looking at, well, what is it possible for us to make a shift to?
Mm.
So it's not just sharing about your emotions, it's the processing of unexpressed emotional energy. Because if it's unexpressed, you'll come back and shoot up your workplace.
See, you're right. DeLayla,
Right?
come
That's
on. I need you.
unexpressed. That is
Stay with.
unexpressed. Over time, it built up like a shaken liter of Coke. And finally, you come out and you're destructive.
Exactly.
I 100%. And we talk about disease because we know people who experience. Harvard did all this great research around people who experience racism and inequities, exclusion. You know, their bodies experience that like pain, and their bodies are. I mean, it's physically shortens our lifespan. We know the impact of those things. So yes, I 100% agree. Delana, saying, can you build on what she just said about the importance of releasing these emotions and the feelings and on both sides? Why is that important, and what advice do you have? That's work you guys are going to do as a part of our deep dives, but let's just talk more about what it is, and why should people care? Why are they, if someone's like, I ain't got no deep emotions, I don't have any, can you bring some clarity?
Yes,
Can
well,
you help us to understand that?
it definitely has been proven that the gut speaks to the brain, okay, and then the brain speaks to the body. So our emotions, we house, especially as women, we're finding out. I mean, just listening to our recent shooting that has happened. You know, we've got athletes now that are going into counseling so that they can release their frustration, that they can talk about, and they can have that anger. They can get it out. Why? Because it is impacting who they are as athletes. It's impacting their performance. So we know that emotions are definitely real. They're real in our consciousness, they're real in our work. It's real. And so because we are speaking from that place of feeling and acknowledgement, and if truly the way we think and feel ah impacts our body physically, and it's been proven, we got to deal with our emotions.
So, ladies, let's be real too. I mean, I love everything that you're saying here. Let's address the fact that we're taught not to share our emotions. We're
Right.
taught not to even acknowledge that you have emotions. we're taught not to address, especially in business. Let's just think about corporate America. We're talking about stopping corporate chokeholds. We're talking about addressing the challenges that we know exist. And you're saying I got to address my emotions. We're taught not to even admit that we have them. Now you're saying release them.
Yes,
Talk me through that.
that's why a lot of corporate America now has a whole department in their human resources to deal with emotions. They have it where now, as a part of your benefit package, that you can pick up a phone and call a counselor. Why? Because corporate America understands the power of healthy lifestyle, healthy mental capacities, healthy emotions, because it is impacting their everyday work. Like we said, if you compact it, you come in and you shoot up your workplace.
It's
Postal, we
true.
we call it
It's
going
true.
postal, right?
Exactly.
You get bomb threats in the banks. I
Mhm.
mean, and these are employees. These are not outside people. These are people who are frustrated at work. So we
It's
Mhm.
come
funny. I mean, and it's everywhere. I hate to say this. I worked 8 years at IBM, 14 years at Disney. Like I said, my last 5 at Microsoft. There was this case at Disney that no one speaks about, but some person at Disney Institute literally went into the office, wrote a letter to everybody in the whole department, sent it out to everybody, and shot himself right there in the cubicle to make a point.
to make
Listed names of individuals, blah blah blah. Like basically, and it was never on the news. I only knew it because I was in the building and was there. It was like, what's all this going? But like, it was never in the news. So things happen. Lives are destroyed. People
yes,
are traumatized. It happens time after time after time, and we never talk about it. I
yeah,
mean, we don't even acknowledge that it exists. So that's kind of like part of the reason I'm using the term corporate chokeholds is because it's the reality of many of us. It's not for everyone, but for those people who it explains why the retention rates have been low for decades. Right? It explains. It's part of the explanation anyway. Thoughts, wisdom. Again,
yeah,
you're talking about doing a thing that you don't even acknowledge exists. You're like saying slay the ghost, and there are no ghosts. You're basically saying address the emotions, and you're not allowed to have emotions. You're saying release the emotions, and the reality, the normality is no emotions. Nothing's happening. Nothing to see here. Corporate
Right.
chokeholds, nothing to see. Yeah, I know we got unconscious bias. Yeah, I know we talk about unequal performance standards, but nothing to see here. It's happening, but then it's like my book. The reason I'm writing the book that I updated the name of this book to be called "How to Become Visible." It's this right here.
Mhm.
How to become. I'm saying, the Bigger Than Me success series, achieving racial equity and inclusion in business, education, wealth, and health. It is absolutely about achieving racial equity and inclusion, but it starts with becoming visible. How do you bring this? This is basically the core of the whole situation. How do you bring a visible suffering that has been made invisible to light so that you can solve it? Ladies, that's the problem.
Well, DeLayla mentioned it, when she talked about personal healing first, right? So there's also an internalized self-defeating belief system and self-negating belief system that's the byproduct of a racist culture. There's all these dynamics that emerge. There's false supremacy and false inferiority, and they work together. False supremacy
that's
and
good.
false superiority and false inferiority. So you often find the brown and black folks in that kind of mix having taken on false inferiority. So you got to heal that. In my household, I grew up in a community where when we moved, there was only 5 Black families. But I had a subculture in my home with 2 parents that grew up in the segregated South and were activists. And so we didn't talk about white people. The word white didn't leave our lips. We talked about Black people, Black excellence, Black excellence, Black genius. And so my dad said, we're not going to talk about white people. We're talking about Black excellence, which is far beyond any conversation about white people, given what we've come through and who we come from, and the creme de la creme that we represent. We're making it across the Middle Passage, given those horrific conditions. We're not going to talk about white folks, please. We're at a whole nother level. So we never talked about you got to work twice as hard to be considered half as good. That was not part of the conversation at the Jackson table. You be excellent, and that will be above all the rest. And that's exactly what my life has shown.
Thank you.
I've been thinking about white folks, but we start to take on the false inferiority, and it continues to interplay with the false superiority, and the system keeps going. So either part can interrupt it. White folks can start calling themselves on the false superiority. We can start explaining the delusional thinking of false inferiority and disrupt, to use your word, disrupt the balance and start to create change. So that's a key piece. If we have a renewing of our mind and we step into our true identity, then we don't participate the same way that we did before. And the other will be required to shift because we're the other dynamic in the dance.
You know, let's talk about that. I love what you guys just said. Can we close on this topic? I know we're just a little bit over. Is that okay?
Yeah. I
Okay.
just want to.
5 more minutes. Perfect. So can we close on what she just said? I just want to close on this idea of shifting based on the inequality that may have occurred for someone who has no thought of being inferior, but calling out an injustice. To be able to call out an injustice that isn't recognized. There's some feelings and some activations that need to happen in that space. And I feel like that's a lot of times where we are. That's why we had Deborah on the call earlier today. We can't have this conversation by ourselves, right? We acknowledge that all the challenges that exist, but we got to bring in white people and influencers and people who, are in the roles, right? Part of it is us, I think, healing ourselves. Part of it is making sure we have the right mindset. But when it's about acknowledging for the greater good that these inequities exist, right? We got to take people on a journey there as well. So what conversation would you have about back to the person in a leadership role that may not acknowledge the injustices that have occurred that we're trying to fix? Let's talk about that. Like, what thoughts do you have about that journey? And I know you already said that if they're not willing, they're not willing. But what if they say they're willing? Then what does that look like? That's kind of the journey we want you to take some people on, the ones that are willing. That's what we're going to focus on.
If there is a willingness,
yes,
then like Debrina said, then we as Black people, then we need to come to the table with what it looks like. That's why you have to understand what your ask is. What is our requirement of white people in roles? What is the requirement? What are we looking for? A lot of times we have these conversations and we're talking about the injustice, but we don't come to the table with what it looks like. What do you want? What will justice look like?
Oh,
unfortunately, we talked about that. We have that. We have what we're calling this bigger than me movement. These bigger than me moments. We actually have multiple ways to shift the power imbalance that currently exists. So we have a series of things there. But again, I do think. Before you even get to solutions, it's like you got to get people to admit that there's a problem and to come to the table, basically.
Well,
So if you guys had to talk to those people, what would you say? Come to
well,
the
I mean,
table, Mr. Man who wants
okay,
to give
so
money but
basically,
doesn't want to change things.
yeah. So this is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm hearing, Tracy, and this is where, to me, and you can, let me know if I'm off to the left here. But I think a lot of times we're so waiting for the apology that waiting for the apology keeps us from moving forward to what we really want. What if they don't apologize?
I
What
don't
if
think
they don't
yeah.
acknowledge it, but they're willing to if you bring them a solution, if you're bringing them what it is that you want, they're willing to give you that.
That is the hope. Yeah, no, yes, ma'am. Debrina?
so I want to add one piece, another real example. Okay, so if we're willing, and there's a way to test willingness.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's what I meant. That's what I want to get to.
You're open at the basic level to some constructive, loving feedback and truth telling. So back to said college. As a board of trustee, we're the boss of the president. We hire, fire, negotiate, evaluate, negotiate salary and evaluate. We're his bosses. Now, here I was, a younger Black woman, and I had to do a number on my own mind because I was the boss of a white man who had a doctorate. So Dr. Fill in the blank was his name. And he was 20 years older than me, 15 years older than me. Nothing in my American experience prepared my mind for I'm his boss. I had to detox my own thinking, and it took a couple years with the help of some mentors to say, do you understand you're his boss? Do you understand you can't be fired? Do you understand he didn't hire you? Do you understand only the Senate of the state of Washington can remove you? Whoa! Usually the boss can fire you. Well, I'm the boss's boss. Like, whoa, had to get my head together. So the boss of the college took me out to lunch. And this was about year 6 of my 9-year service. And it was a few months after the 2015, I think it was 2015 or 2016 summer, where there was a run on the gunning down of Black men by police that summer in July. I think it was 2015. And so he was meeting with me as someone who knows that I was very much about advocating for African-American students on campus, among others. And he wanted to let me know what the campus was going to be doing in response to this. And so that was wonderful. That was great. And at the end of the lunch meeting, he says, is there anything else that you wanted to discuss while we're here together? Now, as it happens, I had already rotated through chairperson one initial time. And we have certain seats in the boardroom, I'm sorry, not the boardroom. Well, yeah, we have seats in the boardroom, but we also have seats in the private conference room for the board of trustees and the executive leadership of the college, where we have our meeting before the big public meeting with microphones in front of us and all that. And I had noticed that when I was sitting on the end of, when I was a new trustee sitting on the end of the table, that he would have eye contact with the other men at the table who are all white, and then he would gloss over me. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe he has a little eye issue on the left side. Well, then every seat I had over the 4 years, including directly across from him as the chair for that year, he glossed over me and had eye contact, glossed over eye contact. 4 years I'd been noting this. So when we're sitting at lunch and he says, is there anything else that you want to say before we go? I said, as a matter of fact, Dr. So-and-so, first name basis, said his first name. I said, I have an observation I want to share with you that I want you to be aware of, because the perception of it could bode it negatively towards you. I said, I've been paying attention to your ability to have eye contact with me during our study sessions after sitting in 4 different seats across from you. And I know for a fact that you do not have eye contact with me while you did have it with the men at the table. I said, now, what I don't know is it because I'm a woman or is it because I'm a Black woman? I don't know which it is. I just know those are probably 2 likely factors, because I notice very distinct behavior when it's males. I said, now, if you were in a conference with a woman making the decision and you unconsciously are having eye contact with her male counterparts who may even be her subordinates, but not her, we might not get the deal, the project, the opportunity, the contract because of an unconscious behavior, maybe tied to a belief, all because of your body language. I said, so I wanted to call that to your attention because I've been noting and tracking it for 4 years. Now, what does he say to that? Because I said, I've got data. I moved to different seats and the same phenomenon happened. So it's not a seating issue, a lighting issue. It's not a position issue. I'm a new trustee. You're not having eye contact. Now I'm the chair directly across from you and you're still doing the gloss over thing, but locking with the eyes of all the men. And so what could he say to that? And except I wasn't aware, and I will become more aware of it. And I noticed,
Is that what he said?
and yes, an effort. What could he say? I had him in a corner. I've already been tracking it. I've got the data. There's differential behavior. So it's either because I'm a woman or I'm a Black woman. That's for you to figure out and get underneath that. because you're in leadership and you're meeting with women and people of color, and that's not okay. Just wanted to share that with you as your boss. Thank you for lunch. And I saw him make an effort to now have that eye contact with me. Now, I was so moved by that moment because I didn't know if in all my previous lineage, a younger Black woman had given that kind of feedback to a white man 15 years older than her that also had the highest degree in the land, doctorate. Because I would have been considered an uppity negress,
Right.
and been hung from a tree the next morning. Not many years ago. Not many years ago. For giving that kind of feedback, the gall of me to give that kind of feedback. So there has been space for truthful feedback. So part of the willingness, and I wasn't disrespectful, I didn't call him out of his name. It was all with a very calm, cool, composed delivery. And many of us that look like me and look like you all, we have some loving feedback to give to our white counterparts who have set it up where it's not okay to give them feedback because there'll be repercussions or a label, a negative label. So the whole system's been set up to not generate any feedback that could be a little contrary to the white person.
Exactly, and that's part of what we're changing. So, ladies, I know we're at time as we
Woo!
move into.
My.
This was amazing. This was
Yes.
amazing. Know that this is the build up to the conversation we're going to take into our next sessions and 9/9 and the Sundays before and after. Because I think we got to have people building on this conversation and continue to get to the next level. So let me just say thank you. Any closing words that you want to share with those who are in this effort with us, who are going to be leaning into the, let's call it the deeper dive sessions, the cohort that you guys are going to be a part of? Any encouraging words that you would say to someone who says they're willing? Invite them to join us on this journey, will you? Start with you, Delayla, and then we'll come to
Yes.
you, Debrina.
Change is not only possible, but it is most definitely attainable and sustainable. So have hope.
Mm, I love that. Debrina Jackson Gandy.
Ooh, that was so good.
Right?
Okay.
Juicy.
Okay, she said it's possible and sustainable. And I'll say it doesn't have to be painful.
Woo,
Ooh.
I love it.
Change is possible, sustainable, and doesn't have to be painful. Oh my goodness. We're actually gonna make it fun. I'm gonna add something to it. We're gonna make it fun. We're gonna celebrate your successes. How about that?
Yes.
Possible, sustainable, does not have to be painful. And we're going to make it fun. We're going to celebrate you and your successes along the way. This is Traci Harrell with Debrina Jackson Gandy and DeLayla Elliott. And it's bigger than me, baby. It's bigger than me. Thank you. Bye.